As an itinerant teacher of the deaf, I sit in on a lot of IEP meetings, and I can tell you that the number of teachers and parents that are at that table who are genuinely confused about the entire process is much higher than most school districts want to admit. And I don't say that to point fingers. I say it because nobody ever sits families down to walk them through step by step the process of an IEP. And many teachers these days are emergency certified, or they just haven't had realistic real world training on the actual IEP process. So handing a sheet of paper to somebody with all kinds of legal jargon isn't helpful for anyone. I can't even understand some of that paperwork. It's crazy. So that's what we're going to do today. I'm going to walk you through all 7 steps of the IEP process from the very first referral all the way through to the annual review so that everyone that's at the table knows exactly where they are, what comes next, and what their role is at every stage. And stay to the end because step number 7 holds a right that most families and teachers don't even know that they have, and it actually is a very important and helpful thing to know. Let's start with step number 1, the referral. The IEP process officially begins with a referral. This is simply a formal request for a child to be evaluated for special education services. That's what most people don't realize. Anyone can make a referral. A parent can request one in writing, a teacher can initiate one, even a doctor's recommendation can trigger this process. So under IDEA, the Individuals with Disabilities Act, once a referral is received, the school typically has 15 days to respond, although this varies from state to state. From there, the evaluation clock starts. In most states, the evaluation must be completed within 60 calendar days of receiving a parental consent. So some states have shorter windows. 45 days is common too, so check your state-specific timeline. What a school cannot do is simply ignore a referral request. I do want to talk about the timeline of an IEP because so far we've had 15 days for the school to respond to a request to referral, and then we've got up to 60 days. Keep that number in mind because we're going to be revisiting it as this conversation goes on. By the way, I want to speak directly from the lens of hearing loss for a second. If you have a child in your classroom or in your home who wears hearing aids, that child should be evaluated. Full stop. Hearing loss is what I call an invisible disability. You can't see it. So while the child may appear to be functioning just fine in a quiet classroom, you actually don't know for sure what they are not hearing. And what they are hearing or not hearing affects how they develop language, how they build their cognitive skills, how they navigate social and emotional situations with peers. These are all areas that don't show up on a report card, but they are absolutely happening underneath the surface. The earlier a child is identified, the earlier the right supports can be put in place. Step 2, evaluation. Once a referral is accepted, the school moves into the evaluation phase. This is where a team of specialists assess the child across all areas of suspected disability. That word all areas matters because the evaluation cannot be limited to just academics. It has to be comprehensive. And parents must give consent before any evaluation begins. Parents, this is what you are entitled to before the process even gets started. When a referral is made, the school is required to provide you with a copy of your procedural safeguards. I know that it is all kinds of linguistic jargon, but you want to read it and you want to make sure that you understand it because it talks about every single right that you have under IDEA. So keep it, read it, know that it exists. The other thing that parents have a right to is copies of the evaluation before the eligibility meeting happens, not just handed to them the minute that they come into the meeting and sit down at the table. Parents are entitled to review these reports in advance so that they can come in and have questions and be prepared. If the school is sending the reports like the night before or handing them to the parents in at the meeting as they walk in, that's not a meaningful opportunity to review the reports. I do see school districts struggle with this a lot. Remember, Most states require that the full evaluation be completed within 60 days of the parental consent. That starts counting from the day the parent signs. Doesn't matter if there's spring break, Christmas break, or summer break in the midst of those 60 days. 60 days is written into the law. Step 3, eligibility. This is where things get a little bit confusing and where I see the most common mistakes being made. After the evaluation, the team meets to determine whether the child qualifies for special education services. To be eligible under IDEA, 2 things must hold true. 1, the child must have one of the 13 qualifying disability categories. And 2, the disability must have an educational impact. Now, educational impact does not mean bad grades. I want to say that again. Educational impact does not mean bad grades. Bad grades may be part of it, but it is not exclusive to grades. This gets misunderstood constantly. Educational impact is not exclusive to report cards or even standardized tests. It includes a child's ability to access the curriculum, participate in school activities, communicate with peers and teachers, and regulate their emotions in the school setting. All of that is educational impact. For kids with hearing loss, this distinction is critical. A child with a hearing loss may be making decent grades, but they are exhausted by the end of every school day because they're working twice as hard just to follow along and try to keep up. They may be missing vocabulary that peers are picking up incidentally just by overhearing conversations in the hallway, at lunch, on the playground, whatever. But these students may be struggling socially because they can't follow in the noise in the cafeteria, and all of that is considered educational impact, even if it never shows up on a report card. Here's the second piece that everyone needs to understand. Eligibility must be tied to the root cause of the child's needs, not the symptoms. So let me clarify what I'm talking about here. Again, back to the lens of a child with a hearing loss. They have a speech delay, and so they qualify them under speech and language. So it sounds logical, but here's the problem. The reason that they have the speech delay is because they can't hear the speech properly in the first place, which is because of their hearing. That child's eligibility should be under deaf and hard of hearing, DHH or HI, whatever it's called in your state, because the disability is driving the need. Speech services can be included in the IEP, but the primary eligibility category must reflect the cause. So getting this right changes everything about how the child's IEP is written and what supports they actually receive. And this is not exclusive to hearing loss. I see the same pattern with autism and speech and language, and ADHD and emotional disturbance, visual impairment and learning disabilities. The principle is always the same. The eligibility must follow the cause, not the symptom. All right, let's talk about step 4, the IEP development. Now, this may be a whole separate meeting after eligibility has been determined, or they may bundle both meetings into one. So once eligibility is confirmed, then the team begins developing the IEP, which stands for the Individualized Education Program. This is the legal document that outlines the child's present levels of performance, their annual goals, the services they receive, and how progress will be measured. Prior to the IEP meeting, parents should receive an invitation with the meeting's purpose clearly stated, enough advance notice to attend, at least 10 days in most states, and access to any evaluation data that the team will be using to build the plan. Some schools even provide draft goals ahead of time. If they don't, a parent can ask for that. So that means that this paperwork needs to be done in advance. Here's a reality check. Technically, the IEP is supposed to be developed collaboratively at the meeting, but realistically, most schools come in with a draft written ahead of time. This is because it's much more efficient. Otherwise, Some of these meetings can go on, I'm not kidding you, for hours. And who wants to sit at a meeting for hours? So oftentimes the paperwork is already drafted. That does not mean that the decisions should already be made. The draft is just the starting point. It's not a done deal. Every member of the IEP team, including the parents, have every right to push back, request changes, and make sure that their input shapes the final document. In the IEP, you will establish goals, and these goals must be measurable. They must be SMART goals, which stands for specific, measurable, achievable, relevant, and time-bound. The challenge in a SMART goal is to be measurable. That means it has to have baselines, timelines, clear criteria for success, not a vague statement like Johnny will improve his reading or Jenny will ask for a repetition if she didn't understand. I can't tell you how often I see goals like this. And quite honestly, that's just not right. If you can't identify whether they did it or whether they didn't, then there's no way for you to actually identify if the goal has been met or not. The IEP meeting must be held within 30 days of the eligibility determination. So remember, we started with 15 days from the referral to the notice of the evaluation. Then the evaluation took 60 days, and now we've got another 30 days. So now we are looking at already 3.5 months from the initiation of the referral to when we're having the IEP meeting. This is a significant amount of time. This is 1/3 of the school year, more than 1/3 of the school year. This can feel very prolonged when we are working on trying to get services set up for a child in the school system. I think that's sometimes why they try to combine the eligibility to the IEP meeting so that we can really get things moving along. Step 5 is the actual IEP meeting. This is where the whole team comes together to review, discuss, and finalize the plan on how to support this child. What's really important is that you have all of the right people at the table to make these decisions. Under IDA, the required members of the IEP team includes the general education teacher, special education teacher, a school district representative who has the authority to commit to district resources, they're called the LEA, someone qualified to interpret the evaluation results, and then the parents. Whenever appropriate, we should always have the student there as well. This is where I often see the missing seat at the IEP table, and that is the specialist with the expertise in the child's specific disability. This is the person who is going to interpret the evaluation results and identify if this disability is impacting them or not. If you're testing a child with hearing loss, you need to have an audiologist and a teacher of the deaf and hard of hearing at that table, because they're the ones who understand hearing loss and its impact on development. So if a child is eligible under autism, then there should be somebody with an expertise in autism at the table. Eligibility specific expertise is not a bonus. This is what ensures that the IEP is built on an accurate understanding of the child's actual needs. By the way, parents are not guests at this meeting. They are equal members of the IEP team. So parents, if you ever feel like the meeting is moving too fast or that decisions are being made without you really understanding them, you have the right to stop and request more time and to reconvene. You can also bring somebody with you, an advocate, a family member, or a professional. Anybody that you want can sit with you for support. Step number 6, implementation. Once the IEP is signed, the school is legally obligated to implement it. Every service listed on that document must be provided. Every accommodation must be honored, and every goal must be actively worked on. So this is where a lot of schools run into problems. It's not because the IEP isn't written well, it's because it's not being followed consistently across every classroom. General education teachers need to know what's in the IEP. And if they're not implementing the accommodation, that's a compliance issue, not just a communication issue. All right, step number 7, the annual review. I told you at the beginning that this is a right that most people don't even realize that they have, or quite honestly, take advantage of. Every IEP must be reviewed at least once a year. This is when the team looks at progress towards the goals and they update the plan and they set the direction for the next year. Under IDEA, a reevaluation of a child's eligibility must happen every 3 years. This is called a triennial review. The school can initiate it, but parents can also request one sooner if they believe that their child's needs have changed significantly. The whole purpose of this is to identify if the child still qualifies for special education because of a disability. Now, the goal is to get the child out of special education. However, some disabilities don't go away, like hearing loss. I actually know many schools and families that waive the triennial review because they don't feel like going through the extensive process of intense testing when the audiogram hasn't changed. But I'm off track a little bit. Let's go back to the annual reviews because when they are done well, they are an important checkpoint. But here's what schools and families often miss. You don't have to wait a whole year to review an IEP. You don't have to wait to call a meeting. You can do this at any time of the school year. So if you believe that a child's needs have changed, or if the current IEP isn't working, if a new evaluation reveals something significant and different, then you can call a request for another IEP meeting. Call it in writing. If a parent calls one, then the school has to schedule it. I've seen people spend an entire year watching a child struggle, assuming they just had to wait until the annual review to make changes. I've also seen teachers realize that the child needs more or actually has achieved goals much more quickly, and they just need to change the plan to continue to support them. So if goals have been met early, or if you see new needs that have popped up and need to be addressed, go ahead and call another IEP meeting. So those are the official 7 steps of an IEP. But I want you to carry something else with you after this video, because this is where most IEP conversations stop, and they shouldn't. We have to keep talking because IDEA is a powerful law, but it's not the only law that's protecting children with disabilities in schools. IDEA governs special education. It's built around what a child needs to access their education and make meaningful progress. That's its lane, and it's a really important lane, but there's a second lane, and it's called equal access. Under the American with Disabilities Act, ADA, Section 504 of the Rehabilitation Act, schools are required to ensure that students with disabilities have equal access to everything that their peers have access to, not just in the classroom and not just academic content. We're talking about the cafeteria, the playground, extracurricular activities, field trips, social events, the full school experience. Here's why this matters. A child can have a beautifully written IEP that addresses every educational goal, and they could still be denied equal access in ways that the IEP never touches. A child with hearing loss who can't follow the announcements over the intercom, or a fire drill, or a child with a visual impairment who can't read the scoreboard at a school sporting event, a child with a mobility impairment who can't physically access the same spaces as their peers. The IEP doesn't cover those gaps, but ADA does. And this is not a theoretical distinction anymore, because courts are increasingly issuing decisions rooted in equal access, not just IDEA compliance. Schools that have technically satisfied every procedural requirement of the IEP process are still being found in violation because a child's experience at school was not equal to what their non-disabled peers had. The legal landscape is shifting, and it's shifting towards a higher standard in that way. Here's what I want parents and teachers to hold on to. Ask both questions. Does this IEP address this child's educational needs? That's IDEA. But also, does this child have equal access to everything that their peers do? That's ADA, and that child is entitled to both. So while the IEP sets the floor for educational support, equal access sets the floor for everything else. A child with a disability deserves both. not just one or the other. If this video is helpful for you, make sure that you click the like button. It helps other parents and teachers find this content. And if you're navigating an IEP right now or wondering about equal access, drop a comment about it. I read every comment. And if you want more resources like this, hit subscribe so you don't miss what's coming out next.